Hi Year 12s. What we're going to be focusing on for this recording is we're going to be focusing on the criterion researching, reacting to stimulus for your IA2s. Now the goal for this is that you're going to have a clear understanding of what is required as documentation to address the researching criterion, focusing on the performance level descriptors, which is these descriptions here, and their characteristics. Now, remembering from conversations that when we mark, that we go from the bottom up. So we need to make sure that you address all the characteristics and each of the performance level descriptors, so each box, so that you can then move up to the next one. Okay, so what I want you to do now is I want you to get your visual diary open, and I want you to have a look first on particularly a double page which has a fair bit of your research on there. Now we're going to go through these performance level descriptors, and then what I want you to do is I want you to then find this evidence, and then I want you to make sure that you can find it, and if you can't, what we're going to do is I'm going to get you to write some information in so that you can address it. Now, you can also use with this is that you can have also beside you, you can have the annotated ISMGs next to you as well that you should have in your visual diary as well. Okay, so we're going to start from the bottom. Now, when it talks about here, so we're not going to look at this one there because you've all got more than a 0. Absolutely. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is the experimentations with media and ideas. Now, the key term in here that you need to make sure that you've addressed is that it's a plural, so ideas. So you need to make sure that in your visual diary that you have more than one idea. So that could be the way that you're possibly addressing your chosen focus. Okay, so that you've got more than that and that you've experimented with media. So that there's evidence of experimentation. So for example, you've got evidence of the way that if you're doing a photography piece, it could be the way that you've done your photographs. It's also how you've also manipulated the media. If you're doing paintings, you've got some, there's some experimentation with that. Interpretation of features and meaning to form visual response. Okay, so that in that you need to make sure that in your annotations you've interpreted your own work, that you've explained the meaning that you've created in your visual, like in your visual responses and the visual forms. So you've actually interpreted it. So you've said, in this composition, this actually means this. Okay, so in that part, you've only interpreted it. Okay, now when we move up, and sorry, before that, I want you to just focus on the word interpret as well. So really focusing as well on explaining the significance of the visual elements. So if you can't find that right now in your visual diary, what I want you to put is the artwork shows something, so whatever it has in it, and this means what? So if you have that in that, that means that you've interpreted it. So that's tick for this one. Okay, so we're going to move up. So we're going to have a look at, we'll look at the analysis and interpretation of visual language and expression in artworks that explore student-directed focus and context. There's a fair bit of information in this one. Okay, first off, I just want you to remember that your student-directed focus, that's your student-devised pathway. That's a response from the concept of artist knowledge and also the stimulus experience. So you come up with your focus, and that's from your IA1s. It may have evolved slightly, but you've got that there. Your context as well is your chosen frame of reference. So you've got in there as well, it's personal, contemporary, cultural, or formal. Okay, so in this, so that's what you're going to be looking at, the way that you've analysed that. So when we're talking about analysis, that you've looked at parts of your artwork and you've explained how these parts, for example, the visual elements, connect to each other. So you've actually analysed it. And I've explained as well, interpret, remaining sort of explaining the significance. So this is you have pulled it apart and linked your parts, and this is explaining the significance of the visual language and expression. What expression means is things like your symbols and the colours, the things that you've included in there that will give some clues into what it actually means. So what the visual language could possibly mean. So in this, you might have a monochromatic work, for example, and you've actually analysed what those parts mean. You've actually interpreted what it means. And then what you need to do is then you need to be able to link that to your focus and your context. So your annotation, you analyse, interpret your own work in relation to your own focus and context. So always make sure that you're being very specific in this, and that you have, if you're analysing it, draw arrows possibly and say links to focus, or draw an arrow then to link to context. So I want you to have a look in your book right now, and I want you to see where you have analysed and interpreted the visual language in your piece and the expression. So, and I want you to be really specific. So I want you to actually put in it's like the symbolisms and the colours and other cues. And then I want you to draw arrows, and I want you to be able to link directly to your focus and your context. Now we're looking at the experimentation to explore ideas relevant to the focus and in response to the inquiry. Okay, so that's the question that you've made up. Now, focusing on this one is that it's relevant experimentation. So if you have experimentation that isn't relevant to your body of work, then that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for experimentations that's relevant to your artworks. So that links directly. So if you've got photography work, that there's experiments with that. If you've got film work, there's experiments there, and that they link directly there. And that there's a very clear link again with your focus and your inquiry. So thinking about, have you got your inquiry question written there? Is there ways then to be able to write some key terms to link then your experimentation? If you've got some printouts, so I would keep them small, remember, because we've got to fit a fair bit of information into our slides. So if you have pictures of your process and this experimentation, so you've manipulated quite a few photos then, I then want you to make sure that you can then link that, the way that you've done this experimentation and how it explores and links directly to your focus. So can you do that now, please? Find that in your diary. Okay, so once you've done that, then we're moving up to 3. Analysis and interpretation of literal and non-literal meaning in the work of self and others through selected contexts. So we know what analyze and we know what interpret mean. Analyze, remember, it's looking at parts of your artworks and explain how these parts connect to each other. And interpret, then, you're looking at explaining the significance. Now, you mightn't have come across these terms very much with the literal and non-literal meaning in the work. So with this, I want you to find evidence in your book with the literal and it links pretty closely with when you're analysing the visual language of it, is that I want you to find with the literal that you've discussed some forms, which is recognisable. So in it, there is maybe a girl in a white dress, and that's pretty recognisable. and that's got clear links. It's really recognizable. It's got clear links to some religious ideas and the way that the dress is, or it may look like a bridal dress. So it's literal. It has some really quite clear links. So you've analysed and interpreted those. And I also want you to look at the non-literal meaning. So that's the unrecognisable. So the clues, it's the visual language that you've put in that makes people ponder. So they might know exactly what it means when they're looking at it. So, for example, let's say you put a black square. There's some black squares in your painting, which might look like a black square, but in fact it links to your focus and means something else. Now, when you're looking at your literal and non-literal meaning, I want you to directly link them to your context. So, for example, if you're talking about this, the literal aspect of this composition, I want you to then have some arrows or some information then that links it directly to your context. And then for the non-literal as well, so that might be further down on the page or in another experiment that you've really linked it directly to it. So there's that nice, clear evidence. Can you look for that now, please? Now, once you've done it for your own work, I then want you to be able, in this, it says, in the work of self and others. So the easiest method of looking at that at the moment and understanding it is with your key artist. So an artist that closely links to the experiment that you're looking at right now, I want you to be able to link their literal and non-literal meaning of their work and link that as well and have some analysis and interpretation of that. How have they addressed this? How have they thought about the non-literal meaning? And does that link towards your context? Now, looking at the experimentation using insights gained through research and exploration of diverse processes. So when you're looking at that, so the experimentations which demonstrate various approaches to the production of the artwork through different media, for example. So when it says diverse process, it doesn't have diverse process, it's got a plural here. So you need to make sure that there's evidence that there's more than one process that you've looked at. Your experimentation as well should be gained. Your insight for this is gained through research. So there needs to be actual research that really links in with this experimentation. That you haven't always just made it off the top of your head. Is there a way? Is there something? Is there a formal, research document? Does it link with your artist? Like what research have you used to inform your experimentation? Is there a range of different medias that you've looked into? I want you to find that evidence now for me, please. Okay, next we're going to move up to our top marks of 4 and 5. Analysis and interpretation to show how context impacts individualized pathways and constructs new knowledge in the work of self and others. End. Okay. Analysis and interpretation show how context, that's the key part. So when you're analysing with this, So remember, it's looking at parts of your artwork and explaining how these visual elements connect to each other. How does your context affect that? How does it impact it? So if you've got a like a personal context or a formal context, how has that affected your experimentation? How has it affected your focus? I want you to be really specific in this. So I want you to directly link it to your focus. So really be very clear. And if you haven't written context and what context it is quite a few times and linked it directly to your experimentation or your research, you need to do that and make that an important element. So don't just mention it, say this links with my context. I want you actually have to analyze it. So explain that you're breaking it apart, that you're explaining how visual elements link to your context, that you've interpreted it, that you've thought about the significance of the visual elements and how that links to your context. Now, also, when we're looking at this element of it, this characteristics, how has the combination of your key artists and your context created a new way of thinking? So your work shouldn't look exactly the same as your key artists, because that wouldn't be a new way of thinking. How have you used all this information, your context and your key artists and your research, and created a new way of thinking? You can see the words here, new knowledge. Has new knowledge been created? When we're looking at experimentation and exploitation of using innovative approaches that capitalize on new knowledge and understanding, I want you to have a look and see if you can identify new and exciting processes like techniques, media use, or theories, which is ways of thinking about art. So is there a new way that you've thought about creating your artwork, and that's been through experimentation? Is it innovating? Is it capitalizing on this new knowledge that you've spoken about through your analysis and your interpretation of your context? Have you spoken about it? This new knowledge that you've created? Is there demonstration of new knowledge gathered from experiments and research artists? How have you changed it? How have you created this new idea, this new way of seeing your art? Also, with your experimentation, is it highly developed experimentation which investigates new knowledge gathered from your artists? What's the quality of your experimentation? This is where editing of your work becomes very important. You need to see if there is some experimentation that you include and some that you do not include. So editing is really important. If in doubt, leave it out. If you've got pieces that your experimentation that doesn't really link to your idea and it doesn't show your best skill, and you have some, I wouldn't put everything in. I would put in and be really thoughtful of your editing process. You still want to be able to show that you've experimented with the media and ideas. Just make sure that what you include links directly to your here, your student-directed focus and your context. So for your pages, so this mightn't just be evidence in your visual diary, but that's what we're just focusing on at the moment. I want you to look through your pages and have this with you and think about where else you can add in your piece and directly link it to your focus and your context, and have a look through your experimentations on your other pages and show that evidence as well. Make it very clear and be specific about it. Okay, so that's the end from me. Good luck. Spend the time going through your visual diary now.